Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, fueling the fire, South Africa's role in Israel's coal follows the work of a few activists challenging what they see as a dangerous double standard, the continued sale of South African coal to Israel. Now, despite South Africa leading the charge at the International Court of Justice for Israel's genocide in Gaza, the country continues to trade with the very state it has taken to court. Now, much of that coal export is linked to one dominant corporation, that is Glencore. Now, this documentary examines how this fuel plays a role in enabling Israel's genocidal war machine, and it highlights the activists who say this needs to end. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome film producer and activist Daniel Friedman. Daniel, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Daniel, this has been a discussion that has been going on even way before October the 7th. How important was it to really raise this awareness, given the extent to Israel's genocide? If we were to take Gaza's health ministry, 70,000 Palestinians murdered at the hands of this regime.
True, and there's also a lot of dispute as to whether that's the full toll, because of course there are those buried under rubble, and of course there was the Lancet report that was released, which suggested that the death toll might be significantly higher. So even that official Hamas death toll is possibly very conservative. It might be many more people who've lost their lives. But yes, it's always been important to highlight the need to stop trading with Israel, because of course this didn't begin on October the 7th. This has been going on since 1948 and even before then. So yes, but of course the genocide has raised the level of urgency around this, because now we are not just talking about the slow ethnic cleansing of people as we were witnessing before, but we are witnessing a full-scale genocide which has ostensibly slowed down because of a ceasefire, but we've seen daily violations of that ceasefire. So certainly it's an ongoing genocide, and certainly that makes the need for South Africa to immediately stop trading with Israel even more urgent.
Daniel, let's start with the core source of this. Glencore hasn't been doing business with Israel since yesterday. There really seems to be a long history of this happening. I guess we both know, and the citizens be well aware, the apartheid government had strong ties with Israel. But in the investigations, in the work that was done, I think give the viewers an understanding of really Glencore's long history with Israel in terms of coal trading.
So I think it's important to note that Glencore has a long history of controversy that doesn't just extend to Israel. Before Glencore, it was called Mark Rich & Co. And it was basically a company founded by one man, Mark Rich, who started as a commodities trader and then moved into coal mining and the export of coal. Now, he was very famous during apartheid in South Africa for sanction busting. He found ways to circumvent the sanctions against South Africa and to make sure that supplies were continuing to flow to South Africa during apartheid. Then he started working with the Iranian government. And of course, the US government did not mind much when he was working with the South African apartheid government. But when he violated sanctions with Iran, then he became a person of interest in the US and ended up on the FBI's most wanted list.
Yes.
He then fled to Switzerland, and like so many corporate people, managed to evade responsibility, lived in a nice mansion in Switzerland, and his company continued to do well. When the company realized that they weren't going to continue trading under the name Mark Rich & Co. because of how much controversy was surrounding it, they changed the name to Glencore and carried on with business as usual. And of course, as we know, the Israeli government and the apartheid government were close allies, and Glencore's it was a company that traded in South Africa before apartheid ended, traded after apartheid ended and has been trading with Israel among many other companies for some time. But currently, they are the main provider of coal to Israel. This was primarily through Colombia, and then second to that, South Africa. But now that Colombia has placed a coal embargo on on Israel, South Africa has failed to follow their lead. And so what we're seeing is as coal from Colombia lessens towards Israel, the coal from South Africa towards Israel is only increasing. So ironically, we have a situation where we have this amazing case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, but we are in the top three coal suppliers. It fluctuates, but always in the top three coal suppliers to Israel, which of course is unacceptable. And this is stuff that, as you say, has its roots in before apartheid even.
You know what's interesting, Daniel, is that Dr. Francesca Albanese, in her report of corporations complicit in the Gaza genocide, Glencore was right at the top. And I think it was kind of like an egg in the face for South Africa, because she had praised the government for saying, well done for taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, but you are, as a government, needing to play more to try and put a question mark or really a statement towards Glencore to say, why are you still going ahead and supplying coal to a country which is active in a genocide?
Absolutely. And of course, Francesca Albanese has been a huge inspiration to us. And in fact, Saran Khan, who's one of the human rights lawyers who we are profiling in this documentary, has used as the basis for his own legal framework towards taking action in South Africa, Francesca Albanese's work for the United Nations, which is incredibly important. And of course, one of the glaring ironies is the fact that we, South Africa, brought this case against Israel to the International Court of Justice. Then, the following July, they ruled at the International Court of Justice that nations do have an obligation to stop trading with Israel. Nations do have an obligation to sanction Israel. So, ironically, we are now at the losing end of our own case. This case is telling us to stop trading with Israel, yet we're still doing so. So, of course, we're not arguing that the case against the ICJ is a bad thing. Of course, we applaud South Africa for taking it, but then the question is, why is there no political will to follow through with what the ICJ recommends, which is for us to sanction Israel? And why are we allowing this hypocrisy of providing coal to Israel through Glencore to continue?
And that's the thing, isn't it, Daniel? There seems to be this sense of hypocrisy that, all right, Glencore is a private company, but surely the South African government can add more pressure. And we will take this discussion, further in the next segment. But it's kind of like it's like the same coin with two different faces in it. From a moral perspective, South Africa's ticked all the boxes in this ICJ case, and yet this trading of coal just seems to be the dark shadow that looms over the country. And you've said it quite well there. It really kind of puts us in a difficult position as a country to still continue this morality while this trade is going on.
Yes, and I would say the big question is, why has South Africa not simply stopped doing this yet? Is it because there are business interests and that those benefiting from these business interests have decided that this will somehow fly under the radar? And this is what we're trying to do with this documentary, is make sure that it no longer flies under the radar, to make sure that South Africa is forced to put its money where its mouth is. And of course, we'll talk about this more in the next segment. But of course, it's not a matter of holding South African government accountable and not Glencore. It's more a matter of calling on government to hold Glencore accountable, as they they have a legal duty to do.
After the break, I will continue the conversation with Daniel Friedman, and that's where we're going to continue. Where does the South African government stand in terms of saying enough is enough, Glencore, this trade needs to stop? Or will capital, will the interests of corporations have the final say in terms of this? We will wrap up the conversation after the break. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Daniel Friedman, film producer and activist coming to us from Haarlem in the Netherlands. Again, thank you so much for staying with us, Daniel. So, Daniel, I guess one of the arguments government would say is that, well, we are the state. The coal is not being supplied by the state. It is being supplied by a private entity in Glencore, hence there's not much that we can do. But yet, if you read, of course, the Constitution and the powers given to Cabinet, especially that of the Minister of Trade and Industry, Park Stow, something can be done with regards to this. So is that just sort of a lazy excuse, or is there more at play in terms of really capital and corporations making the final choice when it comes to matters like this?
Well, you're very right that government would use that as an excuse, because I think really they don't have much else in terms of justification for allowing this to continue. But it's a terrible argument, and I'll tell you why. So to use a very crude analogy, and it is a crude analogy, imagine someone who was one of your neighbors was selling human meat and making food out of it and then selling it as beef. Then there's no way you would be able to argue, no, well, he's a private individual, so there's nothing that government can do. Obviously, government has a duty to step in. They would send the police, there would be a case, the Justice Department would get involved. And it always becomes a question of why are corporations, which are essentially treated like individuals, allowed to act with impunity when individuals aren't. It should be the exact same thing. Any corporation found guilty of corruption or misdoings in South Africa needs to be held accountable. Now, why are we often targeting government? We are going to the Department of Trade and Industry. We are writing letters to Park Stow. We are highlighting the links between Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Minerals and Glencore, and the fact that Patrice Motsepe is the brother-in-law of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Why are we doing this as opposed to just holding Glencore accountable? The reason is because Glencore is a corporation, and as we've seen time and time again, corporations do not act ethically unless they are forced to. They do not have any moral concerns beyond what their shareholders decide. So their motive is making profits. And so there is no universe in which Glencore is going to stop doing this willingly if they're making money from it. We need to force them to stop, and one of the avenues that we can use to force them to stop is the South African government, which does have a duty to step in to stop this. And so we're not saying South Africa's government should be held accountable so much as that South Africa's government must act to hold Glencore accountable.
I want to bring in the Patrice Motsepe link to this, because I'd spoken a few months ago to Professor Patrick Bond, someone that you know quite well, who's also quite involved in this documentary. And he mentioned Patrice Motsepe's name through Africa Rainbow Minerals and its interest within Glencore. The one glaring factor in all of this is, of course, that he is the brother-in-law of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Has there been any contact, like either from your side or your colleagues, in terms of trying to raise this awareness with Patrice Motsepe? Because, of course, he's not just a businessman. He holds quite a influential position from a sports governing perspective. That is, of course, CAF. He's the president of CAF, which is seen as quite an important position within the sports fraternity. So has there been this discussions with regards to that? And if so, how has this been done?
So far, there has, of course, been a lot of highlighting of Motsepe's role, and a lot of highlighting that there is an ongoing partnership between African Rainbow Minerals, which is his company, and Glencore. But I think you're entirely right that more should be done. The activists involved in the documentary, as in the ones that we are profiling, have done a lot in terms of speaking to the Department of Trade and Industry and government, and taking action against Glencore. But I think that you're right that more action needs to be taken directly against African Rainbow Minerals, as in, why do we not write a letter to Patrice Motsepe? Why do we not ask South Africa why they continue to support him as a billionaire if this is what he's involved in? It could be extended even to boycotts of Sundowns, his team, which I know my dad would probably I don't know what he'd say about that because he's an ally of the Palestinian cause, but
Yes.
a longtime Sundown supporter. So who knows? But definitely, I agree that yes, he needs to be held accountable, and yes, for me, if I was him, it would be a no-brainer to drop these contracts to make sure that he's got no links to Glencore because it's not like he needs these links to sustain himself. And ultimately, I think these things could bring him down. They could lead to legal consequences and all sorts of consequences that if I were him, I wouldn't want.
You know, Daniel, when Dr. Albanese came in October, and I was fortunate enough to just get 10 minutes exclusively with an interview with her, that report that she had done had really been so damning and so sad at the same time to just see every single corporation from tech to energy to so much more, and the role that they have played in facilitating Israel's genocide in Gaza. How have you assessed the roles of corporations in what we're seeing in Gaza? Because it's not just the Israeli army that's doing this. They're doing this by getting funded by the world's biggest corporations. And when we see the death toll, it really shows how business has really played this role in what we have seen in the last 2 years.
So that's a very good question. I think this current documentary is very much focused on Glencore. And one of the reasons why it's focused on Glencore is there's very much the ethos of think global, act local, which is how can we locally do something to affect what's happening globally? And I think, as you may or may not agree, to direct your anger solely at Israel
Sure.
is in the end ineffective when there's so much we can do within our communities to stop those who are enabling this to continue. And to answer the bigger question about corporate involvement, yes, it is tragic to hear and to find out through reports like Francesca Albanese's and the work of others that it's Google, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, and these are companies that I think all individuals across the world may or may not be using on a daily basis, but there's that hypocrisy. So I'm going to say that while this documentary is exposing South Africa's hypocrisy, there is also the question of individual hypocrisy. So, for example, I've started the process of weaning myself off big tech. But then there's the question of my Facebook account. I've got people who listen to me on there, and I've gone on to Blue Sky, and I've been able to effect the same. So these are questions we're all facing. How do we move away from big tech in a way that is effective? And I certainly think it would be a great topic for a future documentary, and hopefully this is one of the first. But I would definitely in the future like to look both publicly and privately at how I as an individual can stop using Google, I can stop using Amazon. I've already stopped subscribing. And so you do these small things. So for example, I've stopped using Google Chrome. I now use something called DuckDuckGo, which is a completely independent browser. But I've still got my Gmail account, and that's something I need to look at in the future, moving over to Proton, which is an alternative to Google. And I think more and more we're going to see these alternatives come into play. And I think we do have an individual duty, each one of us, to look at my own consumption. Am I supporting Palestine at a rally on Wednesday and then buying a Coca-Cola on Friday? You know, things like that, simple things like that. And we all need to look at our own complicity in that, because I don't think there's any individual that isn't somehow caught up in the world that isn't using this technology in some way.
Daniel, one final question. With this documentary, what is the end goal of it? Is it simply is it simply to tell Glencore enough is enough? Stop.
It's to tell Glencore enough is enough, but more than that, it's to make this such a vocal issue. To make this. So, in other words, you have in South Africa many examples of issues that have captivated the nation, rightly so. And a good example would be Marikana. This was an unacceptable situation where miners, workers, South African workers, were shot down. It's unacceptable, but so is our country who is supposed to support Palestine, literally fueling a genocide against the Palestinian people through continuing to provide coal. So we need the same amount of public attention to this, and we need this to capture the South African imagination in the same way as our many past controversies have. And to do this, our documentary hopes to raise awareness and to literally shift the dial. We are explicitly saying that this is not a documentary which is simply saying, look at these activists, they're doing a great job, clap, clap, clap. We are with them in trying to stop the sale of coal to Israel by South Africa. And we hope that the outcome of our documentary is that it shifts the dial and adds to the work of the amazing activists who are already trying to achieve that.
Daniel Friedman, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Much
Can
appreciated.
I, before I go, just say our movie is in a critical period. We are crowdfunding it. And if anyone wants to support us, please find us on BackaBuddy. The movie is called Fueling the Fire, a documentary, if you'd like to donate.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Much appreciated. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
An absolute pleasure. Daniel Friedman, he is a film producer and activist involved in the Fueling the Fire, South Africa's role in Israel's coal. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus. I will see you again on Saturday for Talking Point from myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. If you've missed today's episode, you will find it on our YouTube channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.